Today, we're tackling something really essential, foundational even. We're doing a comprehensive, in-depth evaluation of the FAA's Remote Pilot Study Guide. That's the FAA G808222.
Yeah, this is really the framework for anyone aiming for that Part 107 certification. The commercial license you need to operate small unmanned aircraft systems, or sUAS.
And we're not just, summarizing test questions here, are we?
No, not at all. We're really mapping out the critical knowledge, what you absolutely need to know to operate safely, professionally, within the National Airspace System at LASS.
That professional operation piece is, well, it's becoming more and more critical, especially across heavy industry.
Oh, absolutely.
We've seen this huge growth in using sUAS technology, particularly in non-destructive testing, NDT. We're talking drones doing visual inspections on really high-value, sometimes high-risk assets, things like commercial aircraft fuselages, chemical storage tanks, utility towers, bridges.
Exactly. And, the ability to send up a drone instead of a person, it moves inspectors out of some really dangerous situations. High-access work, confined spaces sometimes. It's a massive improvement for safety and for efficiency, too.
But there's a catch.
There is. That safety benefit, it just evaporates if the remote pilot doesn't have a really solid, rigorous understanding of the rules, the environment they're flying in, and this is key, their own limitations. This certification material, it's really the minimum baseline knowledge needed to ensure that level of professionalism.
Okay, so let's unpack this guide. We'll go chapter by chapter. But first, before we jump into the details, there's something mandatory we need to cover, compliance stuff.
Right. Got to get the disclaimer in early. So, before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This podcast is an independent educational evaluation of the Federal Aviation Administration's Remote Pilot Small Unmanned Aircraft Systems, sUAS, Study Guide, FAAG 808222. AMS Level 3 is not affiliated with the FAA, and this content is not a replacement for studying the official materials.
Okay, good. So our mission today is basically to walk through the structure of that official FAA study guide. We want to give you a solid, detailed framework for your test prep, but also, maybe more importantly, show you how to integrate this knowledge into actual NDT inspection planning and, safe operations out in the field.
Exactly. We'll be connecting the dots, between the core aviation theory and the specific demands you face when you're flying commercial payloads on these high-stakes inspection jobs.
Makes sense. And today's episode is brought to you by AMS Level 3 Consulting, Training, and Compliance Solutions for stronger NDT programs. You can learn more in the description. All right, let's dive in. Chapter 1. Right at the beginning, it lays down the foundation for any commercial sUAS operation. It points to the Remote Piloting Command, the PIC, straight to the absolute core document.
That's right. It's Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Everyone just calls it 14 CFR Part 107. If you're flying a small drone commercially, this is your rule book, period. It tells you what you need to do, what you're allowed to do, and what the limits are. Things like, that 400-foot maximum altitude above ground level AGL. And the visual line of sight rule, that's a big one.
And like with most regulations, it's rarely just one single document, is it? The study guide makes it clear Part 107 is only part of the picture. There's another really important companion document you have to know.
Yeah, definitely. That's the Advisory Circular, or AC 107-2. Think of it like this. If Part 107 is the law, AC 107-2 is the FAA's detailed guide on how to follow that law. It gives you clarifications, acceptable ways to comply.
And that's especially important for NDT operators, right? Because of waivers and things.
It's exactly. Understanding AC 107-2 is vital because it explains how you get permission for things that aren't standard under Part 107, like operating over people or over moving vehicles or night operations. That used to be a no-go, but now it's possible if you follow the specific conditions laid out in the AC.
So Part 107 says what you have to do, and AC 107- gives you the playbook for how to do it safely and legally, especially if you're doing complex inspections that might need, non-standard flight plans.
Precisely. A professional NDT program, they're going to treat Part 107 and AC 107-2 just like they treat their own internal inspection procedures. They're mandatory operational standards.
Okay, so we've got the basic rules of operation. Now let's talk about the environment. Airspace. Chapter 2. This is often where new remote pilots really get tripped up, right? It's a lot of chart reading, spatial thinking.
Absolutely. It can feel overwhelming at first. The key is understanding how the FAA structures it all. First off, airspace is either regulatory or non-regulatory. And then within those, you've got four main types: controlled, uncontrolled special use, and other airspace.
And for drone pilots, that controlled versus uncontrolled distinction is huge.
Paramount. because controlled airspace almost always means you need to get authorization from air traffic control, ATC, before you fly.
All right, let's break down controlled airspace first. You've got classes B, C, D, and E, and you said B, C, and D always require authorization.
That's right. Class B is around the nation's biggest, busiest airports. Think Chicago O'Hare, Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson. It usually looks like an upside-down wedding cake on the charts. Starts at the surface, goes up to usually 10,000 feet mean sea level, MSL. Because there are so many large manned aircraft moving fast, remote pilots must get ATC authorization beforehand.
And how do you typically get that authorization?
Nowadays, it's usually through the LAANC system. That's LAANC. Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability. It's an automated system, makes things much quicker for routine flights below approved altitudes.
Okay, what about Class C?
Class C is for airports that are busy, but maybe not quite at the level of Class B, medium-sized hubs, often with airline service. The standard shape is surface up to 4,000 feet above the airport elevation, usually a 5 nautical mile radius core with a 10 nautical mile radius shelf above that. And again, ATC authorization, typically via LAAC, is mandatory.
Got it. And Class D, that's the smallest controlled zone.
Generally, yeah. Class D is around airports that have an operating control tower, but the traffic is usually less complex than B or C. It extends from the surface up to 2,500 feet above the airport elevation. Now, here's an important point. If that control tower closes for the night, the Class D airspace often reverts to Class E or sometimes Class G. You have to check the chart supplement for the specific airport. But while the tower's active, you absolutely need ATC authorization.
Okay, so B, C authorization needed. Clear. Now, Class E, this one seems vast.
It is. Class E is basically all the controlled airspace that isn't A, B, C, or D. It covers a huge amount of the country. But here's the key difference for Part 107 pilots. You generally do not need ATC authorization for routine operations in Class C, as long as you stay below that 400-foot AGL ceiling, defined by Part 107.
Where does Class E airspace typically begin, like altitude-wise?
It varies. Often it starts at 700 feet AGL, especially around airports that don't have a control tower but have instrument approaches. In other areas, more remote areas, it commonly starts at 1,200 feet AGL. This means if you're flying your drone at, say, 300 feet AGL for an inspection, you might actually be in Class G airspace, even though Class E starts just a few hundred feet above you.
So you really need to know the vertical boundaries from the sectional chart.
Exactly. And a quick visual tip for the charts. See those broad blue lines? Those are Federal Airways. Victor Airways, they are almost always Class E airspace, starting at 1,200 feet AGL and going up to, but not including, 18,000 feet MSL. So stay clear below them if you don't need to be near them.
Okay, that makes the controlled versus uncontrolled distinction really practical. So, uncontrolled is Class G.
Class G is basically the default airspace. It's any airspace that hasn't been designated as Class A, B, C, D, or E. It typically goes from the surface up to the floor of the overlying Class E airspace.
Yeah.
For drone operations, this is often the simplest airspace to operate in, but, and this is a big, but you still have to follow all the Part 107 rules, especially maintaining visual line of sight and yielding to all manned aircraft. See and avoid is always paramount.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears to special use airspace, or SAO. These are areas with limitations or potential hazards.
Yeah, you absolutely need to be aware of these, especially if your NTT work takes you near military bases or certain government facilities. The most restrictive are prohibited areas, P areas. The name says it all. Flight is flat out prohibited for national security reasons. Think the White House, Camp David, sensitive military sites. Don't even think about flying there.
Then there are restricted areas. R areas, what's the hazard there?
Restricted areas usually involve activities that are hazardous to aircraft. Things like artillery firing, aerial gunnery, guided missiles. Flying into an active restricted area without specific permission from the controlling agency is incredibly dangerous.
So how does an NDT pilot know if it's active or hot?
You have to check. The activation times are listed on the sectional chart, but they can change. The best way is to check the current NOTAMS notices to airmen for that specific R area. You might also need to contact the controlling ATC facility listed on the chart. Whether you can get clearance depends entirely on if the area is active or if it's been released back to the FAA for general use.
Okay. What about warning areas, W areas? They sound similar.
They are similar in terms of hazardous activity, but warning areas are located over international waters, starting 3 nautical miles off the coast. Since the U.S. government doesn't have sole jurisdiction there, it's classified as a warning rather than restricted. It's basically telling pilots, hey, hazardous military activity might be happening here, enter at your own risk.
Got it.
Military Operation Areas, MOAs, seem pretty common on charts too.
Very common. MOAs are designed to separate military training activities from regular instrument flight rules, IFR traffic. The training can involve high-speed maneuvers, aerobatics, things that aren't compatible with standard air traffic. They're marked on sectional charts with magenta dashed lines.
Can a drone pilot fly in an MOA?
Legally, visual flight rules, VFR traffic, which includes Part 107 operations, is permitted in MOAs. However, the FAA strongly urges pilots to exercise extreme caution. Before entering, it's highly recommended to contact the controlling ATC agency to find out if the MOA is active and what kind of activity is taking place. Or, if possible, just fly underneath the charted floor of the MOA if you can maintain your mission altitude below it safely.
Okay, then there are alert areas, A areas. Alert areas just signify areas with a high volume of pilot training, or maybe some unusual type of aerial activity, like lots of student pilots practicing maneuvers. Again, caution is advised, but there's no specific restriction on entry. Collision avoidance remains everyone's responsibility, yours, and the training pilots.
And finally, the ones that aren't usually charted, controlled firing areas, CFAs.
Right, these are interesting. CFAs have activities that could be hazardous, like explosives testing or small rocket launches. But the key difference is that the activity is immediately suspended if spotters could be ground spotters, aerial spotters, or even radar detect an approaching aircraft. Because they stop the activity for you, CFAs don't need to be charted since they don't technically pose a hazard to pilots who aren't aware of them.
Makes sense. Chapter 2 also hits on other airspace areas. Let's talk about temporary flight restrictions, TFRs. These seem really important.
Critically important. TFRs are absolutely non-negotiable. They pop up for specific events or situations and restrict flight in those areas for a set time. They're issued via Flight Data Center, FDC, NOTAMs.
What kinds of things trigger a TFR?
All sorts. Air shows, major sporting events, rocket launches, natural disaster areas like wildfires or hurricanes to keep the airspace clear for emergency responders. And, very importantly, security TFRs for protecting the president, vice president, or other public figures. These have become much more common since 9/11.
And it's the pilot's job to know about them.
Absolutely, 100%. The remote PIC's responsibility to check for TFRs during pre-flight planning. Every single time. Flying into a TFR is a serious violation. You could lose your certificate, face hefty fines. It's just not worth it. Always check the NOTAMs.
Okay. How about military training routes, MTRs? I remember these often show up on the tests, especially the identification part.
Yes, MTRs are routes used by the military for low-altitude, high-speed tactical training. We're talking potentially well over 250 knots, sometimes just a few hundred feet off the ground. They're identified on charts by either IR for instrument routes or VR for visual routes, followed by a number.
And the number of digits in that number tells you something important, right?
Exactly, that's the key takeaway. If the route identifier has 4 digits, like IR 234 or VR 4321, it means no segment of that route goes above 1,500 feet AGL. These are the really low-level routes. If the identifier has 3 digits, like IR 123 or VR 432, it means at least one segment of that route operates above 1,500 feet AGL. For a drone pilot typically operating below 400 feet AGL, those 4-digit low-level routes, IR or VR followed by 4 numbers, represent the most significant potential conflict. Be extra vigilant scanning if your operation is near one of those.
Good distinction. Okay, let's wrap up airspace with the overall function of the AS and ATC.
Well, the main goal of air traffic control is pretty straightforward. Prevent collisions between aircraft and keep the flow of traffic orderly and efficient. But even with ATC providing separation services for many aircraft, the fundamental principle of flying in the U.S., whether you're in a Boeing 747 or a small quadcopter, is see and avoid.
So the ultimate responsibility lies with the pilot.
Yes. The remote PIC has the primary, ultimate responsibility to see and avoid other aircraft. That means constantly scanning the airspace where you're operating, using visual observers effectively, and yielding the right-of-way to all manned aircraft.
And that brings us back to NOTAMs, which we mentioned for TFRs and restricted areas. They cover more than just airspace restrictions, right?
Oh, definitely. NOTAMs are for any time-critical, temporary information that's essential for flight safety. It could be an unexpected hazard like a crane near an approach path, runway closures, taxiway closures, inoperable airport lighting systems. If you're doing an NDT inspection near an airfield and the main runway approach lights are out, that's critical information you'd find in a NOTAM. Always check them as part of your pre-flight.
Okay, so Chapter 2 tells us where we can potentially fly in terms of airspace. Chapter 3 tackles the next big question, should we fly based on the weather? This moves us from spatial limits to atmospheric ones. Hashtag A, Aviation Weather Sources 3A.
Right. And knowing where to get good weather information and how to interpret it is absolutely critical for safe drone operations. Your pre-flight planning depends heavily on standardized weather reports. The most fundamental one for current conditions on the ground is the METAR.
METAR. That's the Aviation Routine Weather Report.
Exactly. It's an observation of the current surface weather at an airport reported in a standard international format, usually updated hourly.
The study guide gives a pretty dense example of METAR. Let's try to break that down, maybe focusing on the risks for a drone pilot. The example is KGG 1617 Faber did Z, Ayuto 14021 G26 KT or CB 1817 A2970 RMK pre SFR. Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is, but each piece tells a critical story. Let's decode it. KGGG is the airport identifier. 161753Z is the date and time. 16th day of the month, 17.53 Zulu time. Coordinated universal time. Our UTOTO means it was generated automatically. Now the wind. 1400 G26 KT. Wind from 140 degrees true north at 21 knots, gusting to 26 knots.
Okay, 21 gust and 26 knots. That's already pretty sporty for a lot of CAS, right? Especially if you're carrying NDT gear.
Absolutely. Many smaller drones, especially with external payloads, have wind limits well below 26 knots. Flying in those gusts would be difficult, maybe uncontrollable, and definitely drain the battery fast. So, red flag number 1.
Next bar, 34 SM plus TSRA BR.
Okay, visibility, SM means statute miles, is only 3/4 of a mile. And the weather phenomenon is plus TSRA BR. The plus sign means heavy. TS is thunderstorm. RA is rain. BR is mist. So we have heavy thunderstorms with rain and mist, reducing visibility to less than a mile.
Hold on, Part 107 requires minimum visibility, doesn't it?
It does. The remote pilot or visual observer needs at least 3 statute miles of visibility. This METAR shows less than 1 mile. So just based on visibility alone, this flight is illegal under Part 107. Not to mention flying into a heavy thunderstorm is incredibly dangerous. Red flag number 2, and it's a big one.
All right, next is sky condition, BKN 008 OVC 0
Sky condition, broken clouds, BKN at 800 feet AGL, overcast OVC at 1200 feet AGL. But look at the end of that second layer, CB, that stands for cumulonimbus.
The thunderstorm cloud.
Exactly. Seeing CB in a METAR or TAF is a huge warning sign for any pilot. It means severe turbulence, potential for hail, lightning, strong up and down drafts. Basically, all the hazards associated with thunderstorms are likely present or developing. Red flag number 3.
Okay, what about the last block? 1817 A2970 RMK pre-SFR.
Temperature 18 degrees Celsius, dew point 17 degrees Celsius. They're only 1 degree apart. That's called the narrow temperature dew point spread. It means the air is nearly saturated with moisture. Very high humidity, perfect conditions for fog, continued heavy rain, or low cloud formation. A2970 is the altimeter setting in inches of mercury 29.70. This indicates lower than standard pressure, often associated with poor weather. And the remark, RMK pre-SFR. That means pressure falling rapidly.
Which usually means?
Usually means worsening weather is on the way. A low-pressure system or a front is likely moving in. So this remark confirms everything else we've seen. This is hazardous weather, and it's likely getting worse, not better. Red flag number 4.
So putting it all together, a remote pilot seeing this METAR, the decision is pretty clear.
Absolutely crystal clear. You scrub the flight, don't even think about launching, reschedule for another day. Trying to fly in these conditions is illegal, unsafe, and asking for trouble. This example really highlights why understanding METARs is crucial for risk assessment.
It really does. Okay, so METARs are current conditions. What about forecasts? That's where TAFs come in.
Right. TAF stands for Terminal Airdrome Forecast. It's a forecast, not an observation. It predicts the weather conditions expected within a 5 statute mile radius of an airport. They typically cover a 24 or 30-hour period and are issued 4 times a day. TAFs use a similar format to METARs, but they include special codes to indicate expected changes in the weather over time.
What are the key change indicators we need to know?
The 2 big ones you'll see are FM and tempo. FM stands for from. It indicates a rapid, significant, and lasting change is expected to occur around a specific time. Think of it as the start of a whole new weather period within the forecast. Tempo, on the other hand, means temporary. It indicates temporary fluctuations in conditions, things like showers, brief lower visibility that are expected to last for less than an hour at a time and occur during less than half of the specified time period.
So understanding FM versus tempo helps you decide whether a weather issue is short-lived or likely to stick around.
Exactly. If you see tempo TSRA, temporary thunderstorms, you might be able to wait it out on the ground for an hour or 2. But if you see FN TSRA starting at a certain time, that means the forecast expects thunderstorms to begin and likely continue, so you might need to pack it in for the day.
Makes sense. What about larger scale severe weather?
For that, you look at SIGMETs. Specifically for drone pilots, convective SIGMETs, abbreviated as WST, are really important. These are issued for hazardous convective weather, basically, severe thunderstorms. They warn about things like surface winds greater than 50 knots, hail 3/4 of an inch in diameter or larger, tornadoes, embedded thunderstorms hidden within other clouds, or lines of thunderstorms affecting a large area. Checking for active WSTs gives you that bigger regional picture. If there's a line of severe storms moving through the state, maybe your multi-site NDT inspection plan needs a major rethink. Hashtag tag B. Effects of weather on sUAS performance, 3B.
Okay, so we know how to get weather info. Now, how does that weather actually affect the drone itself? The study guide highlights density altitude as critical.
It is the single most important factor when you're talking about how weather affects aircraft performance, especially for rotorcraft like most drones. Density altitude isn't actually a physical height. It's a theoretical concept. It's the altitude the aircraft thinks it's flying at, based on the density of the air.
So thin air means the drone performs worse.
Exactly. When the air is less dense, what we call high-density altitude, everything gets harder for the aircraft. Lift decreases, engine motor output is less efficient, propellers or rotors are less effective, performance goes down across the board.
What conditions create that high density altitude, that poor performance situation?
There are four main culprits you need to remember. 1. High field elevation. Starting higher means the air is already thinner. 2. Low atmospheric pressure. Less pressure means less dense air. 3. High temperatures. Hot air is less dense than cold air. This is a big one in summer. 4. High humidity. This one feels counterintuitive to some people.
Yeah, why does moist air hurt performance?
Because water vapor is actually lighter than the nitrogen and oxygen molecules that make up most of dry air. So when there's a lot of water vapor in the air, high humidity, the air mixture becomes less dense overall. So high humidity contributes significantly to high density altitude and reduced performance.
And for an NDT pilot, maybe carrying a heavy thermal camera or a LiDAR unit near the drone's weight limit, this density altitude effect could be a major problem.
Huge problem. Let's say you did your performance calculations based on a cool, dry morning. You know your drone can handle the payload. But then the job gets delayed until a hot, humid afternoon. Suddenly, the density altitude is much higher. Your drone might struggle to lift off, climb performance will be sluggish, your battery will drain faster because the motors are working harder. Your safety margins just shrink dramatically. You must calculate performance based on the current conditions, not standard day conditions, especially when operating near weight limits.
Okay, that's crucial. What about sudden, dangerous weather phenomena like wind shear?
Wind shear is any sudden, drastic change in wind speed and rudder direction over a very short distance. It can happen at any altitude, but low-level wind shear near the ground is especially hazardous for takeoff and landing and for low-altitude inspection flights. You can get it with passing weather fronts, thunderstorms, or even just strong surface winds flowing around obstacles like buildings or terrain.
And the most severe type of wind shear is a microburst.
Right, yes. Microbursts are associated with thunderstorms, sometimes even just rain showers. They're small-scale but incredibly intense downdrafts. When that column of air hits the ground, it spreads out horizontally in all directions, creating violent wind shear.
How does that affect a drone flying into one?
It's a classic dangerous sequence. First, as you fly into the outflow, you encounter a sudden headwind. This momentarily increases performance, might make the drone pitch up. Then you enter the core of the downdraft itself, which pushes the drone rapidly toward the ground. Finally, as you fly through the other side, you hit a strong tailwind. This suddenly decreases performance, reduces lift, and can cause the drone to pitch down and lose altitude rapidly. This whole sequence can happen in seconds and can easily overwhelm a small drone's ability to recover, potentially forcing it into the ground even with full power applied. Avoid areas where microbursts are likely, namely under thunderstorms and heavy rain shafts.
Scary stuff. We also need to think about atmospheric stability, stable versus unstable air.
Right. Stability refers to the atmosphere's tendency to resist or encourage vertical motion. Stable air resists vertical movement. If you push stable air up, it wants to sink back down. This usually leads to smooth flying conditions, but also things like stratiform layered clouds, steady precipitation, like drizzle, and poor visibility because smoke, haze, or pollutants get trapped near the surface. Unstable air, on the other hand, encourages vertical movement. If you push unstable air up, it wants to keep rising. This leads to turbulence, bumpy air, Cumuliform, puffy, vertically developed clouds, showery precipitation, and generally good visibility between showers.
And that poor visibility in stable air is often linked to temperature inversions.
Very often. Normally, air gets colder as you go up in altitude. Temperature inversion is when that pattern flips. Temperature actually increases with height for a layer. This warmer layer acts like a lid, trapping cooler, denser air below it. Any smoke, fog, haze, or pollutants released near the surface get stuck under that inversion layer, leading to very poor visibility, which can be a major issue for maintaining visual line of sight.
Okay, last couple of weather hazards, icing and thunderstorms again. Icing first, what conditions cause it?
Structural icing, ice forming on the airframe or rotors, needs two things to happen at the same time. One, you have to be flying through visible moisture. That means clouds or precipitation, rain, drizzle, snow. Two, the temperature of the surface the moisture hits, like your drone's propeller, must be at or below 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Even a tiny amount of ice, especially on rotor blades, can completely disrupt the airflow, destroy lift, add weight, and cause the drone to become uncontrollable very quickly. Avoid visible moisture when temperatures are near or below freezing.
And what about frost, even just a thin layer?
Frost is incredibly dangerous, even if it looks thin and light. It forms on surfaces when the temperature is below freezing and there's enough moisture in the air, high humidity, or dew. That rough surface, even from light frost, significantly disrupts the smooth flow of air over the rotors or wings. It drastically reduces lift, sometimes by 30% or more, and increases drag. The rule is absolute. The aircraft must be completely free of frost before flight. Don't try to just brush it off or assume it'll blow off. Clean it thoroughly according to the manufacturer's recommendations.
Got it. Let's revisit thunderstorms, the cumulonimbus clouds, CBs. We know they're dangerous. Can you walk us through the life cycle?
Sure. Thunderstorms generally go through three distinct stages. Stage one, the cumulus stage. This is the building stage. It's characterized almost entirely by updrafts. Air rushes upwards, feeding moisture into the growing cloud. These updrafts can be strong, sometimes exceeding 3,000 feet per minute. You definitely want to avoid flying into these. Stage two, the mature stage. This is when the storm is at its peak intensity and is the most dangerous. Precipitation rain, sometimes hail begins to fall from the cloud base. This signifies that downdrafts have developed alongside the updrafts. So now you have strong updrafts and strong downdrafts existing side by side, creating severe turbulence. All the thunderstorm hazards are present now. Heavy rain, hail, lightning, strong gusty winds, microbursts, maybe even tornadoes. Avoid mature thunderstorms by a very wide margin. The FAA recommends at least 20 nautical miles. Stage three, the dissipating stage. Eventually, the updrafts weaken and are overcome by the downdrafts. The entire storm becomes characterized mainly by downdrafts and rain falling out. The storm essentially rains itself out and collapses. While the hazards lessen, downdrafts and lingering turbulence can still be present.
So basically, avoid thunderstorms at all stages, but especially the mature stage.
That's the bottom line. Give them a very wide berth.
All right, let's move from the environment to the machine itself. Chapter 4 deals with loading weight, balance, and how that affects aerodynamics. The responsibility here seems clear. The remote PIC must verify the aircraft is loaded correctly before every flight.
Absolutely, and this ties right back into that density-altitude discussion. If conditions are hot and humid, high-density altitude, you might need to reduce the payload weight compared to what you could carry on a standard day just to maintain safe performance margins. It's just like following an NDT procedure. If you exceed the specified limits of your equipment, whether it's weight limits for the drone or calibration limits for a sensor, the operation is invalid and potentially unsafe.
So let's talk about the key concepts. Center of gravity, CG, and center of pressure, CP.
Right. The center of gravity, CG, is the single point where the entire weight of the aircraft, including the airframe, batteries, payload, everything, is considered to be concentrated. It's the balance point. The center of pressure, CP, is the average point where the aerodynamic force of lift acts on the wings or rotors.
And how do these 2 points need to relate for the aircraft to be stable?
For most conventional aircraft designs, including multi-rotors, the CG must be located forward of the allowable center of pressure range. Having the CG slightly ahead of the lift force creates a natural nose-down tendency. This makes the aircraft inherently stable in pitch. The flight control system can then easily make small corrections to maintain level flight or respond to commands. If the CG gets too far aft, behind the acceptable limit, the aircraft becomes unstable. It might want to pitch up uncontrollably or become very difficult to handle, especially if you're carrying an NDT payload that shifts the CG, like a side-mounted camera or a sensor on a long boom. Proper loading and checking the CG is critical.
Overloading seems like an easy trap to fall into, trying to carry more sensors or bigger batteries. What are the main negative effects of exceeding the weight limit?
Overloading degrades performance in several key ways. You'll need a higher takeoff speed or more power to lift off vertically. Your rate of climb will be reduced, and the maximum altitude you can reach, your service ceiling, will be lower. Maneuverability suffers. The aircraft will feel sluggish and less responsive to controls. And this is a big one. Your stalling speed increases. The aircraft will stall or lose lift at a higher airspeed than normal. All these things eat away at your safety margins, making it harder to operate precisely, especially when flying close to structures during an inspection.
Let's dig into load factors a bit more, the G-forces.
Load factor is simply the ratio of the total lift being produced by the aircraft to the total weight of the aircraft. It's expressed in Gs, where 1 G is the normal force of gravity. In straight and level flight, the load factor is 1 G. Lift equals weight. But anytime the aircraft deviates from straight and level flight, like in a turn or a pull-up, the load factor changes.
And steep turns are where this really becomes apparent.
Exactly. As they bank the aircraft to turn, you have to increase the total lift to maintain altitude, because some of that lift is now being used to pull the aircraft around the turn. This increases the load factor. For example, in a level coordinated turn with a 60-degree bank angle, the load factor is 2 Gs. The aircraft effectively weighs twice as much, and the structure has to support that load. Go to an 80-degree bank, and the load factor shoots up to almost 6 Gs. The stress on the airframe increases dramatically.
And this increased load factor directly impacts the stalling speed, right?
Critically, the stalling speed increases in proportion to the square root of the load factor. So at 2 Gs, like in that 60-degree bank, the stalling speed increases by the square root of 2, which is about 1.41 times the normal stalling speed. At 4 Gs, the stalling speed doubles. This means you can stall the aircraft at a much higher airspeed than normal if you impose a high load factor suddenly. For example, by making an abrupt pull-up to avoid an obstacle, or yanking it into a steep turn. Even if you think you're flying well above the normal stall speed, a sudden maneuver can increase the load factor enough to cause an accelerated stall. Smooth, coordinated control inputs are essential for safety, especially when maneuvering near weight limits or obstacles.
Okay, Chapter 5 talks about what happens when things go wrong, emergencies. It clarifies the pilot's authority in those situations.
Yes, and it grants significant authority. The remote PIC is allowed to deviate from any rule in 14 CFR Part 107 to the extent necessary to respond to an in-flight emergency. The absolute top priority is the safety of people and property on the ground. If you need to break a rule, fly over people briefly, exceed an altitude temporarily to safely resolve an emergency like a lost link or a battery failure, you have the authority to do so.
But you have to justify it afterwards. Is reporting required?
That's the interesting part. You only need to submit a written report about the deviation to the FAA if the FAA asks you to. However, even if they don't ask, you should absolutely document the incident thoroughly yourself, what happened, why you deviated, what actions you took, for your own records and potentially for insurance or company procedures.
Beyond the deviation authority, the chapter really emphasizes preparation, doesn't it? Pre-flight and crew briefings.
Absolutely. Preventing emergencies is always better than reacting to them. The PIC's responsibility for safe operations starts with a meticulous pre-flight inspection. Check the drone, check the batteries, check the props, check the control links, make sure any NDT sensors are securely mounted and balanced. Correct any issues before you fly. And if you're operating with a crew like a visual observer, maybe someone manipulating the sensor controls, you must conduct a thorough crew briefing before the flight. This briefing needs to cover the planned operation, but critically, it must also cover planned emergency procedures. What happens if we lose the control link? What's the flyaway procedure? Who communicates with who? Where are the emergency landing zones? Everyone needs to be on the same page before an emergency happens. Pre-planning is key.
All right, let's take a quick pause here. We'd also like to recognize Skaggs Media LLC as the creative force behind today's podcast. Skaggs Media helps businesses build a strong social media presence through strategy, content, and storytelling that connects. You can find them at spaggsmedia.com. Okay, we're back, and now we're shifting focus pretty significantly. We've talked about the rules, the environment, the aircraft. Now we need to talk about the most complex component, the human operator. We're actually going to jump ahead to chapters 9 and 10 first, covering the human element, physiology, and decision-making, because understanding these really underpins everything else, especially things like crew resource management, which is in an earlier chapter. So chapter 9, physiological factors, how our bodies and minds affect our ability to fly safely.
And the regulations themselves, Part 107, are very clear on this. It explicitly prohibits any crew member, the PIC, the person manipulating the controls, even the visual observer, from performing their duties if they are impaired in any way. That impairment could be due to injury, illness, medication, alcohol, drugs, fatigue, anything that prevents them from safely carrying out their responsibilities.
The rules around alcohol are particularly strict, aren't they?
Extremely strict. You cannot act as a remote pilot or crew member if you've consumed any alcohol within the preceding 8 hours. That's the 8 hours bottle to throttle rule. You also can't fly if you're under the influence of alcohol, regardless of the time, or if your blood alcohol concentration is 0.04% or greater. That's half the legal limit for driving in many places. But honestly, the professional standard should be zero tolerance. Any alcohol consumption can impair judgment and reaction time, even below the legal limits. Don't mix flying drones professionally with alcohol, period. And be mindful of hangovers, too. They definitely count as impairment.
To help pilots assess their own fitness for flight, the FAA promotes the IMSAFE checklist. Can you break that down?
IMSAFE is a fantastic personal risk assessment tool. It's a mnemonic you should run through before every single flight operation. It stands for I for illness. Do I have any symptoms? Cold, flu, allergies. Am I feeling unwell? M for medication. Am I taking any prescription or over-the-counter medications? Could they have side effects like drowsiness or dizziness? S for stress. Am I under unusual psychological pressure? Work stress, family stress, financial worries. Stress significantly degrades performance. A for alcohol. Have I consumed alcohol within the last 8 hours, or longer if I still feel any effects? F for fatigue. Am I tired? Did I get enough sleep? Am I feeling physically or mentally drained? E for emotion or eating. Am I emotionally upset, angry, anxious, depressed? Have I eaten properly and stayed hydrated? Being brutally honest with yourself using IMSAFE is crucial for safety. If you fail any part of the checklist, you shouldn't be flying.
Let's focus on that medication part for a second. Lots of NDT techs might take something for a headache or allergy meds. What's the guidance there?
That's a really important point because even common over-the-counter drugs can have significant side effects. Things like antihistamines in allergy or cold medicine often cause drowsiness. The FAA's general recommendation is crucial. If you start taking any new medication, whether it's prescribed or OTC, you should wait at least 48 hours after the first dose before acting as a pilot or crew member. Why 48 hours? It gives your body enough time, usually 5 dosing intervals, to see if you experience any adverse side effects that could impact your flying skills. Drowsiness, dizziness, slowed reaction time, impaired judgment. Don't guess, wait and see how it affects you. And if in doubt, consult an aviation medical examiner, AME.
Okay. Another big one on the IMSAFE list is fatigue. The guide calls it a major cause of pilot error.
It really is. Fatigue is insidious. It degrades attention, slows reaction time, impairs coordination, and clouds judgment. The guide distinguishes between acute fatigue, which is short-term tiredness from lack of sleep or exertion, usually curable with a good night's rest, and chronic fatigue, which is longer-term, often related to underlying physiological or psychological issues, and usually requires medical treatment. A specific type of acute fatigue mentioned is skill fatigue. This happens during demanding tasks. Your timing gets disrupted, movements become less precise, and crucially, your attention narrows. You might get tunnel vision, focusing only on the drone's camera feed and completely missing other things in your peripheral vision, like an approaching aircraft or a bird.
That tunnel vision seems especially relevant for NDT work, where you might be focused on a tiny flaw in a structure.
Exactly. You have to consciously fight that tendency, force yourself to keep scanning the broader environment, or rely heavily on a well-briefed visual observer.
What about environmental factors? Heat, dehydration, especially for long inspections outdoors in the summer.
Critical factors. Dehydration happens easily, especially when you're focused on the job. Symptoms like headache, fatigue, cramps, dizziness, they all significantly reduce your cognitive performance and physical ability. The rule of thumb is, don't rely on feeling thirsty. By the time you feel thirsty, you're often already dehydrated. Drink water regularly throughout the operation, especially in hot weather. Heat stroke is even more serious. That's when the body's temperature regulation system fails. It can lead to collapse and requires immediate medical attention. Recognizing the early signs of heat stress in yourself and your crew is vital. Take breaks in the shade. Stay hydrated.
And finally, under physiological factors, let's talk about vision. So much of Part 107 relies on seeing the drone and the surrounding airspace.
Yes, see and avoid relies entirely on effective vision. The study guide emphasizes proper scanning techniques because the human eye has limitations. Our sharpest vision is only in a very small central area, and peripheral vision isn't great at detecting details or motion unless it's pronounced. So you can't just stare blankly at the sky. You need a systematic scan. The recommended technique is to scan segments of the sky. maybe 10 degrees wide at a time. Pause your eyes in each segment for 2 to 3 seconds. This pause gives your eyes time to focus and detect any potential traffic. Then move to the next overlapping segment. Whether you scan left to right or right to left, the key is short pauses and overlapping coverage. This applies equally to the PIC and the visual observer.
Okay, so Chapter 9 was about the body and mind's physical state. Chapter 10 builds on that, focusing on the process of thinking and making safe choices in the cockpit, or rather, at the control station. This is aeronautical decision-making, ADM.
And the statistic often quoted is startling. Something like 80% of all aviation accidents have human factors as a primary contributing cause. That really underscores why ADM is so vital. ADM isn't just about reacting to problems. It's a systematic approach to consistently perceiving hazards, assessing risks, and choosing the best course of action.
A big part of ADM is recognizing internal biases or attitudes that can lead to poor decisions. The guide lists 5 hazardous attitudes. These seem like classic human tendencies.
They really are. And recognizing them in yourself is the first step to countering them. Let's run through them quickly, along with their antidotes. 1. Anti-authority. The rules don't apply to me, don't tell me what to do. The antidote is, follow the rules. They're usually right. Don't cut corners on checklists or procedures just because you think you know better. 2. Impulsivity. I need to do something, anything now, acting without thinking. The antidote. Not so fast. Think first. Don't rush into a decision, especially in a developing situation. Analyze your options. 3. Invulnerability. It won't happen to me. Accidents happen to other people. This is a huge trap, especially for experienced pilots who become complacent. The antidote. It could happen to me. Maintain a healthy respect for the risks involved in every flight. 4. Macho. I can do it. Watch this. Trying to prove yourself by taking unnecessary risks. The antidote. Taking chances is foolish. Don't let ego drive your decisions. Fly within your limits and the aircraft's limits. 5. Resignation. What's the use? I can't do anything about it anyway. Feeling helpless when things start to go wrong. The antidote. I'm not helpless. I can make a difference. Stay engaged. Work the problem. Fly the aircraft. Never give up.
Knowing those attitudes is one thing, but actively managing risk is the goal, right? The guide talks about principles of risk management.
Yes. Risk management is proactive. It's about identifying potential hazards before they become problems and figuring out ways to mitigate the associated risks. The 4 core principles are: 1. Accept no unnecessary risk. Is there a safer way to do this? Can the risk be avoided entirely? 2. Make risk decisions at the appropriate level. Who has the authority to accept this level of risk? Sometimes it's the PIC, sometimes it needs higher management approval. 3. Accept risk when the benefits outweigh the dangers or costs. This is a careful balancing act. Is completing this complex inspection flight worth the elevated risk from marginal weather? 4. Integrate risk management into planning at all levels. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be part of every mission brief, every pre-flight check.
To help with that integration, the guide introduces some practical models. First, the PAVE checklist for perceiving hazards.
PAV is another great mnemonic, specifically for identifying potential hazards during pre-flight and in-flight. It prompts you to consider P for pilot. That's your MSAFE check. Are you fit to fly? Experienced enough for this mission? Current. A for aircraft. Is the drone airworthy? Are the batteries fully charged and healthy? Is the payload secure? Is the CG within limits? Software updated. V for environment. What's the weather doing? METARs. TAFs. What's the airspace classification? Any TFRs? Are there obstacles on site? Terrain. Electromagnetic interference sources. E for external pressures. Is there pressure to get the job done quickly? Client demands. Supervisor expectations. Peer pressure. Get there, aka-itis. These external factors can dangerously influence your judgment.
Okay, so PAE helps you perceive the hazards. How does that fit into the larger decision-making loop, the 3P model?
Right, PAVE is the input for the first step of the 3P model. The model itself is a continuous cycle. Perceive, process, perform. So first, you perceive the hazards using tools like PAV and your general situational awareness. Then you process the impact of those hazards. What could happen? What are my options? How likely is it? The guide suggests using another checklist here called CARE. Consider consequences, evaluate alternatives, assess the reality of the situation, consider external factors. Finally, you perform the best course of action. You make a decision and act on it. The guide offers the team checklist for choosing your action. Can I transfer the risk? Example, delay until conditions improve. Can I eliminate the hazard? Can I accept the risk if benefits truly outweigh costs? Or, most commonly, can I mitigate the risk, take actions to reduce its likelihood or severity, and then the cycle repeats. You perform the action, then you perceive the new situation, process it, and perform again. It's ongoing.
That sounds like a very structured way to think through problems. Does it apply in fast-moving emergency situations too?
It can, but the study guide makes an important distinction. That analytical approach, PAV, CARE, TEAM, or similar models like DECIDE, works well when you have some time to think. But in time-critical situations, experienced pilots often rely more on what's called automatic or naturalistic decision-making. This is based on pattern recognition. Through training and experience, they've seen similar situations before. They recognize the pattern almost instantly and can often execute the correct response without consciously working through all the analytical steps. This is why recurrent training, simulator practice, and learning from experience are so valuable. They build that library of patterns that enables quicker, more intuitive decision-making when seconds count.
That makes sense. Experience builds those mental shortcuts. We jumped ahead, but let's circle back now to Chapter 6, Crew Resource Management, or CRM. Since we've covered the individual pilot's physiology and decision-making, CRM is about how we manage all available resources, especially the people involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
CRM originated in the airline world to combat accidents caused by poor communication and teamwork in the cockpit. But the principles apply just as much to a two-person drone crew as they do to a 747 flight deck. Even if it's just you, the PIC, and one visual observer, VO, you need effective CRM. It's about managing all available resources, personnel, equipment, information to achieve safe and efficient operations.
What does that look like in practice for a typical drone operation?
It means things like clear communication protocols, using standardized terminology, conducting thorough pre-flight briefings that clearly define roles and responsibilities for the PIC, the VO, and anyone else involved. It means fostering an environment where the VO feels empowered and obligated to speak up immediately if they see a hazard like unexpected manned aircraft traffic or the drone getting too close to an obstacle, or even if they think the PIC seems fatigued or stressed. It directly counters that resignation hazardous attitude. Everyone has a role in safety.
How is this particularly relevant for complex NDT missions?
In NDT, you often have competing demands. The PIC might be highly focused on maneuvering the drone precisely to get the right sensor reading or image quality. The VO's primary job, meanwhile, is maintaining that visual line of sight on the drone itself and scanning the surrounding airspace for conflicts. Good CRM ensures clear task allocation and communication. When the VO calls out traffic, helicopter 9 o'clock low, closing, the PIC needs to react instantly, acknowledge the call, and prioritize collision avoidance over the inspection task. Standardized callouts and responses prevent confusion in critical moments.
So if ADM is about managing your internal resources and decisions, CRM extends that to managing the entire team and external resources effectively.
That's a great way to put it. They're intertwined. Good ADM by individuals supports good CRM within the team, and good CRM helps individuals make better decisions by providing more information and backup.
Okay, Chapter 7 moves into radio communication. Now, as remote pilots operating under Part 107, we're generally not required to talk on aviation radios, are we?
Not typically, no. Unlike manned aircraft pilots operating in controlled airspace, Part 107 doesn't mandate radio communication for routine flights. However, understanding aviation radio procedures and being able to monitor the appropriate frequencies is incredibly valuable for situational awareness, especially if you're operating anywhere near an airport or in areas where manned aircraft might be flying low.
So it's about listening in to know what else is happening in the sky.
Exactly. Particularly around non-towered airports. These airports don't have an active control tower directing traffic. Pilots flying in and out are expected to communicate their position and intentions on a common frequency so everyone knows what everyone else is doing.
And that common frequency is called the CTAF.
Right. CTAF stands for Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. It's the designated frequency for pilots to self-announce their positions and intentions at non-towered airports.
How do you find out what the CTAF frequency is for a particular airport?
You have to look it up. The primary sources are the current sectional chart for that area, or, even better, the Chart Supplement US, which used to be called the Airport Facility Directory. The chart supplement gives you the most detailed info, including the specific CTAF frequency. If the airport has a Unicom station for non-government ground communication or an FSS flight service station on the field, the CTAF is often the Unicom frequency, commonly 122.8 MHz. If there's no tower, no Unicom, no FSS listed, then pilots use the designated multicom frequency, which is always 122.9 MHz. Knowing which frequency to monitor allows you to hear manned aircraft announcing their approach, departure, or pattern work.
What are the key announcements a drone pilot should be listening for to build that mental picture of nearby manned traffic?
Pilots at non-towered fields should ideally make calls at several points. 1. about 10 miles out from the airport, announcing their aircraft type, position, altitude, and intention, e.g. landing, overflying. 2. When entering the traffic pattern, stating which leg they're on, for example, entering left downwind for runway 27. 3. When turning onto the final approach leg. 4. When clear of the runway after landing. If you hear Cessna 123 Alpha Bravo turning final runway 27 podunk traffic, you know exactly where that aircraft is and can assure your drone is well clear.
Understanding the call sign seems pretty important too, to make sense of who's talking.
Definitely. And aircraft in the U.S. usually have an N number registration, like N123AB. On the radio, they use the ICAO phonetic alphabet, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, etc. So N123AB would be set as November 123 Alpha Bravo. However, pilots often shorten it. They might replace November with the aircraft type, Cessna 3 Alpha Bravo, or just use the last 3 characters, 3 Alpha Bravo, once communication is established. Airliners use their airline name followed by the flight number, Southwest 2410. Being able to decode these call signs helps you track specific aircraft as they make position reports. It turns radio chatter into useful situational awareness.
Moving on to Chapter 8, which seems like a bit of a review, focusing on determining performance.
It is largely a review, but it hammers home a really practical point for sUAS pilots. Unlike certified manned aircraft, performance data provided by drone manufacturers, things like takeoff distance, if applicable, climb rate, range, endurance, isn't standardized or required by the FAA in the same way. So the data you get might be optimistic or measured under ideal conditions. The key takeaway is to be conservative.
What if the manufacturer provides very little data?
That can happen. In that case, the guidance suggests seeking out reliable data published by other users or independent reviewers for your specific drone model and payload configuration. Use that as a starting point, but always conduct your own test in controlled conditions to verify performance, especially endurance, before relying on it for critical missions. And always build in safety margins.
And this chapter also brings us back to density altitude again, doesn't it?
Yes, it reiterates that critical link. High temperatures and high humidity decrease air density, which increases density altitude, which negatively impacts performance. No matter what the manufacturer's chart says about battery life or lift capacity, that data is likely based on standard atmospheric conditions. You must consider the actual temperature and humidity on the day of your flight and understand that your actual performance, particularly endurance and climb rate, will likely be worse if density altitude is high. Factor that into your planning, always.
All right, let's wrap up the core knowledge areas with chapters 11 and 12, which cover airport operations and maintenance. Chapter 11 seems to revisit some airport concepts.
It does, reinforcing some basics. Knowing the different types of airports, towered versus non-towered, civil, military, private use, is important context, and it reemphasizes the key sources for getting detailed airport information.
Which are?
Again, the aeronautical charts, sectionals, VFR terminal area charts, give you the visual overview, the roadmap. Remember, the standard sectional scale is 1.500,000. But for the most comprehensive, up-to-date details, runway lengths, lighting, services, local procedures, frequencies, potential hazards, you need the Chart Supplement US. Remember, it's updated every 56 days, so make sure you have the current version. And for real-time weather and airport information at larger airports, listening to the ATI's Automated Terminal Information Service broadcast before operating nearby is crucial. Remember, ATI's broadcasts have an alphabetical code, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, identifying how current the information is.
Chapter 11 also briefly touches on some navigation basics, like latitude, longitude, and variation.
Right, just the fundamentals. Latitude lines, parallels, run east-west, measuring distance north or south of the equator. Longitude lines, meridians, run north-south, measuring distance east or west of the prime meridian. GPS coordinates use this system. Variation is the difference between true north, the geographic pole, and magnetic north, where your compass points. This angle varies depending on where you are on Earth. It's shown on sectional charts as dashed magenta lines called isogonic lines. While your drone's GPS navigates based on true coordinates, understanding variation is important because manned aircraft often navigate and communicate using magnetic headings. Knowing the local variation helps you interpret the radio calls correctly.
Okay, now for a really practical hazard discussed, antenna towers.
Yes, this is a huge one for low-altitude drone operations. Extreme caution is needed anywhere near tall towers, especially those over 1,000 feet AGL, and even more so below 2,000 feet AGL. The big, often invisible danger is the guy wires supporting many skeletal towers. These wires can extend horizontally outwards from the tower base for a significant distance, sometimes 1,500 feet or more, and they are incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to see from the air. The recommendation is clear. Avoid flying within 2,000 feet horizontally of tall guide towers to ensure you remain clear of those wires. Treat them with extreme respect.
Makes sense. Finally, Chapter 12 briefly covers maintenance.
Briefly, yes. It emphasizes that the remote PIC is ultimately responsible for ensuring the drone is in a condition safe for flight. This means performing regular maintenance according to the manufacturer's instructions and critically conducting thorough pre-flight inspections. For more detailed guidance on what constitutes good maintenance practices, record keeping, and pre-flight checks, the study guide points you directly to Chapter 7 of the Advisory Circular, AC 1072. Consistent maintenance and meticulous pre-flights are your last line of defense against equipment failure in flight. #tag outro.
Wow, okay. That was quite a deep dive through the FAA's study guide.
Yeah.
If we try to sort of synthesize the big themes, we've covered the rulebook part 107 and AC 107.2. We've covered understanding the world you fly in airspace, weather, navigation aids. We talked about managing the drone itself, loading, performance maintenance, and maybe most importantly, we spent a lot of time on mastering the human element, physiological factors, aeronautical decision-making, and crew resource management.
Absolutely. And bringing it back to the NDT context, for you professionals using drones for inspections, mastering this material isn't just about passing a test. It's non-negotiable for safety and effectiveness. When you're flying that expensive sensor package close to a wind turbine blade or mapping corrosion on a bridge structure, your understanding of density altitude, your ability to quickly interpret a changing weather report, your disciplined use of checklists and ADM, that directly translates into safer flights, better data, and a more professional NDT program overall.
It really connects the aviation knowledge directly to the job quality.
Completely. Professional flight planning and execution leads to professional inspection results.
So while this guide is the foundation, we definitely encourage everyone to keep learning. Use the official FAA sources listed in the guide's Appendix 1, the AM, Aeronautical Information Manual, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, PHAK, the Airman Certification Standards, ACS, for the test itself. This knowledge base is really just the starting point.
Well said. Continuous learning is what builds that expertise, that intuitive decision-making capability we talked about.
Okay. Before we wrap up, if you enjoy these deep dive analyses and want to support the work we do here, you can scan the QR code in the description to buy us a coffee. Your support really helps keep this content coming. And remember, AMS Level 3 is here for your NDT needs consulting, training, mentorship, and compliance solutions like NADCAP and FAA readiness. You can learn more at amsl3.com and subscribe for more insights like these.
And maybe one final thought to leave you with, connecting back to ADM and risk management. We talked about the PAVE checklist for identifying risks. Remember that the FAA regulations, like Part 107, provide the minimum standards, the legal floor for safety. True professionalism, true operational excellence requires setting personal minimums.
Personal minimums, like higher weather standards than the FAA requires.
Yes, exactly. Based on your current skill level, your recent experience, the specific drone you're flying, how stressed or fatigued you are feeling that day, maybe the rules allow flight in 20-knot winds, but your personal minimum for that complex inspection near obstacles is only 15 knots. Document those personal minimums. Stick to them religiously. Never let external pressures, a client, a deadline push you to operate right up to the regulatory edge if your own assessment says the risk is too high for you right now. That's the mark of a truly professional pilot.
Excellent point. Always fly within your own limits, not just the FAA's. Okay, that's all the time we have for this deep dive.
Just a final disclaimer. This podcast is an independent educational evaluation of the FAA's Remote Pilot Small Unmanned Aircraft Systems, sUAS, Study Guide, FAG 808222. AMS Level 3 is not affiliated with the FAA. Produced by Skaggs Media, LLC, skaggsmedia.com.
If you've made it this far in the podcast, I'd like to ask for your support. Please consider buying us a coffee. Your contributions help cover the monthly subscriptions we use to produce these NDT training videos and keep new content coming. We offer 3 levels of support. NDT Level 1, $1 per month, NDT Level 2, $2 per month, and NDT Level 3, $3 per month, or a one-time gift of your choosing. Just scan the QR code on the screen to join and help us continue delivering updated NDT resources right here on YouTube. At AMS Level 3, our mission is to strengthen technicians and companies through consulting, training, and compliance solutions. Subscribe to our channel for more mentoring insights, share this video with your team, and give it a like to help spread the word. Visit us at amsl3.com to learn more about our services and resources designed for NDT professionals at every level. And a special thank you to Skaggs Media, the creative force behind these videos. Learn more at skagsmedia.com.